It began with a moment that would ignite outrage across the nation. In a setting where words are meant to inspire leadership, one insult cut deeper than anyone expected. A rising political figure hurled a remark so loaded, so humiliating that it echoed with the sting of racial prejudice. "Go back to India." What followed was not silence, nor retreat, but a response from Kash Patel that would ripple through living rooms, headlines, and social media feeds. Few could have predicted how his comeback would turn an insult into a defining moment that shook America's conscience. Karoline Leavitt was no stranger to political controversy. A young and ambitious figure, she had built her career on sharp rhetoric and unapologetic sound bites that played well with certain crowds, but drew fierce criticism from others. Her rise was fueled by a new wave of politics that thrived on division, where shocking statements often translated into headlines and influence. In the midst of this storm stood Kash Patel, a man whose career had already been marked by service, resilience, and a constant battle against the labels others tried to impose on him. The stage was set in an America deeply polarized, where every word spoken by public officials carried the weight of history and the fire of current struggles. For many, politics had become less about policy and more about identity, who belonged, didn't, and who had the right to claim the title of American. It was in this environment that Patel found himself not only defending his record, but also his very existence as a son of immigrants who had worked tirelessly to carve his path into the highest circles of government. The insult directed at him was not just a personal attack. It was a reflection of a much larger struggle. Generations of immigrants had endured the same slur, the same dismissal, same suggestion that no matter their contributions, they would never truly belong. Patel knew this fight was bigger than him, and how he chose to respond would either reinforce the cycle of humiliation or break it in a way that forced the nation to confront its own conscience. The insult did not exist in isolation. It came at a time when America was already simmering with questions of belonging, identity, and power. Debates over immigration, loyalty, and heritage had been weaponized by those seeking to carve out political advantage. Yet for all the slogans and fiery speeches, the human cost was rarely acknowledged. Kash Patel became the living symbol of that silence. His story now thrust unwillingly into the national spotlight. The moment Karoline Leavitt's words hit the air, they triggered something deeper than a political clash. For Patel, it was not the first time he had heard such dismissive venom, but the weight of hearing it in such a public, unapologetic manner bore down heavily. The attack was not against his politics. It was against his very existence, a reminder that no matter how far he had climbed, there were still those who believed his heritage disqualified him from truly belonging. The cameras caught it all. Clips of the insult spread like wildfire online, sliced into sound bites designed to provoke outrage or laughter depending on the audience. Within hours, social media became a battlefield. Hashtags exploded, some calling for accountability, others mocking Patel and defending Leavitt's outburst. Political commentators fanned the flames, spinning the story into narratives that suited their agendas. What should have been a moment of reflection for the nation instead became another round in America's endless war of culture and politics. Behind the scenes, Patel wrestled with more than anger. There was the exhaustion of carrying the weight of generations before him. Those who had faced the same cruelty, but lacked the platform to fight back. His mind turned to his parents, who had come to America with little more than grit and hope. And to every child of immigrants who had been told they didn't belong, for them, silence was not an option. His response could not simply defend his name. It had to echo on behalf of millions who lived in the shadows of similar prejudice. Meanwhile, Leavitt's allies closed ranks. Some downplayed the remark, insisting it was taken out of context. Others doubled down, claiming Patel's outrage was manufactured, a political tool. The hypocrisy of it all was glaring. Those who demanded respect for their own voices dismissed the very real sting of Patel's humiliation. Power was at play here, the kind of power that thrived on minimizing pain when it came from the wrong side of the aisle. The stakes grew heavier with each passing day. Patel's silence and the immediate aftermath left the nation waiting, bracing. For what he might say? Would he retaliate with equal venom, turning the insult back on his attacker? Would he ignore it, allowing the moment to fade as so many before had? Or would he find a way to turn the cruelty into something larger, something capable of shifting the conversation entirely? Every hour of quiet only added to the suspense. His supporters urged him to strike hard, to seize the moment for political gain. But Patel knew that any response driven purely by anger would dissolve quickly in the chaos of the news cycle. If he was going to answer, it would have to be with something so powerful, so undeniable, that the insult itself would become secondary to the truth it revealed. And when he finally broke his silence, America was not ready for what he had to say. When Kash Patel finally spoke, it wasn't with rage or bitterness. It was with a clarity that cut sharper than any insult ever could. Standing before cameras, he looked calm, composed, yet unshakably firm. A man who had carried not only his own burden, but the burden of millions who had been told the same words. Go back. Began not by addressing Karoline Leavitt directly, but by recounting the sacrifices his parents made. It's how they arrived in America with little more than hope. How they worked long hours in jobs few others wanted, scraping together enough to give their children a chance at a better life. And how, through sheer determination, that dream had led him from small beginnings to the highest levels of national service. Every word reminded the audience that his story was not one of division, but of resilience, an American story in its truest form. Then, his voice tightened, carrying the weight of generations. He declared that telling someone to go back was not merely an insult, but a denial of their humanity and their right to belong. It was an attempt to erase their contribution, their sacrifice, their place in the nation they called home. He refused to let that insult define him or anyone who had ever been made to feel like an outsider. The crowd listening grew silent, the moment heavy with truth. What had begun as a cheap remark designed to wound had transformed into a moment of revelation, one that forced the nation to confront its own prejudice. The insult no longer hung in the air as a victory for Leavitt. Instead, it stood as a testament to her smallness and Patel's strength. In that instant, Patel shifted the narrative. What was meant to belittle became the spark that amplified his voice. Beyond anything his critics could have imagined, Patel's response reverberated far beyond the room where he delivered it. News outlets replayed his words again and again, framing them as more than a rebuttal. They became a statement about the soul of America. Social media, once divided, began to shift. For every voice defending the insult, dozens rose to praise the strength and dignity of Patel's reply. The moment had transcended politics. It had touched something deeper, something raw and human. Leavitt's comment, once meant to belittle, quickly became a shadow that followed her everywhere. What was intended as a display of dominance backfired spectacularly, casting her as a symbol of the very prejudice that Patel had so eloquently dismantled. Meanwhile, Patel's standing only grew. He had not just defended himself, he had carried with him the story of countless others, offering them a voice in a conversation that had too often excluded them. But the true consequence of that moment was not in the headlines or political polls, it was in the hearts of those who saw themselves reflected in Patel's words. Immigrants, children of immigrants, and marginalized communities who had once been silenced felt a surge of validation. For them, it was proof that dignity could triumph over cruelty, and that one person's courage could force an entire nation to look in the mirror. In the end, the insult that was supposed to diminish him became the catalyst that elevated him. It became a reminder that the measure of a leader is not found in the attacks they endure, but in how they rise above them. Patel rose not just for himself, but for millions who carry the same scars. And so the question lingers. In a nation built by those who came from elsewhere, who truly has the right to say who belongs?